Shalom Bethel family. It's Thursday, and once again time to take a look at our Torah discussion from last week at Bethel. Last week we read Parshat Noach, and it's a very interesting parsha because it really sets the stage for the Jewish journey. Even though Noah and his son sort of predate Judaism, here is how the story of Noah really sets up the principles upon which Judaism is based. In order to understand that, we need to go back to the story a little bit and look at the symbolism of the story. Now, we talk about the symbolism of the Noah story a lot. It's filled with a lot of symbolism. We see the dove with the olive branch in his beak, all over as a sign of peace. We see the rainbow as a sign of peace and a promise of security. But one symbol that we don't really talk about a lot, but that I think is crucially important, is in fact the symbol of the water itself. Right? What makes the symbol of the rainbow and the dove so powerful are that, especially the rainbow, it still holds that same symbolism, not only in the context of the Noah story, but even today. Here in Norfolk, Virginia, we get these storms that come out of nowhere. It starts pouring. Where we live, the streets start filling with water, and it's scary. And depending on the time of year and how much rain we've gotten, and if it's high tide, might even do a lot of damage. But no matter how hard that rain comes down and how much water collects, just as quickly as it came in, those storms move off. And when we're lucky, when we go outside, we see a rainbow. And there is a palpable sense of relief that the world is going on and the rules that govern it still stand. And particularly after hurricanes like Harvey, the flooding in Houston, and Irma and Maria, Puerto Rico still devastated by Hurricane Maria. That is still a very poignant symbol because we still walk outside after a storm and see the rainbow and still have that sense of relief that, okay, the world is still beautiful and it's going to go on. No matter what damage was done, we're going to be able to heal and move forward. But what makes that rainbow such a poignant symbol is, in fact, the fright of the water itself. Now, look, God wants to destroy that generation of man and animals. They've become violent. And so God can do that, just by thinking it, or I don't know. It's hard to say when we talk about God exactly how God completes an action, but certainly does not need to bring a massive flood in order to do so. Now, I will admit that God does have a flair for the dramatic in the Torah, whether it's the plagues in Egypt or coming down on Mount Sinai, parting of the Red Sea. Time and again, we see God likes to make a show of things, but we assume, since God does not have to make such a show, that there's symbolism in that show. So the question is, why does God use water to destroy the world, as opposed to or destroy that generation of man and animals, when it seems wildly unnecessary? In order to understand, I want to look at the nature of water itself. Right? Water comes up time and again as a tool of punishment in the Torah. We have the flood in last week's Parsha in the Noah story. We have the story of the Jews coming out of Egypt, the Israelites coming out of Egypt, and God brings them through the parted Red Sea, and then the waters close up on the Egyptians, punished again by water. And even throughout the rest of the Torah, we understand that water is always sort of a tool used by God to create obedience with the people. God mystically brings a well of water to take care of them in the desert, but there's always a threat that that water will be taken away. And even in the Shema itself, the middle paragraph of the Shema, it's explicitly said that when we break our part of the covenant, God will show God's God's disappointment by withholding rain. Because in the land of Israel, if there's no rain, there's no water. So water comes up time and again as this symbol of punishment. However, it's not all bad when we talk about water. In fact, as Judaism develops and the rabbis start commenting and the And even in certain places in the Tanakh, water actually becomes a symbol for Torah itself, right? The central document of Judaism, the central concept of Judaism, of Torah, of learning and of growing, that is associated with water. That just like water gives life and allows plants to grow strong and straight and healthily, so too Torah gives us life and allows us to grow strong and straight and healthily. So obviously, water is not all bad if Torah is water. So how do we explain that? How can it be both the source of such massive destruction and also the source of such goodness? In fact, the source of life, one of the necessary elements of life. But when you stop and think about it, actually, so many of the fundamental elements that we rely on have this same dual nature. They are both very powerfully good and can be very powerfully bad. When we think about it with fire, right? It provides warmth, cooks our food, heat to survive in the extreme cold, and yet it can also burn and destroy. Even food and medicine, when you think about it. When we make the right decisions about food, it's necessary and helpful. When we eat gluttonously or eat the wrong things, it can do extreme damage. And medicine, a famous doctor once said, the only difference between medicine and poison is the dose, right? So even the most life-saving medicines, when taken in the wrong way, can, be the source of incredible destruction in our lives and of life. And so God chooses one of these basic elements, water, one of these elements of life, but also of destruction, of duality, to punish the people of the generation of the flood. Why? Because just as these fundamental elements have both a very positive side and a very negative side, so too is the case with people. The punishment of the flood is measure for measure, right? It's punishing in a way that reflects the crime, right? Because we, as people, can be the source of care and love, but also the cause of hate and pain and destruction. As we learn in the Tanakh, we are crafted from dust, and to dust we shall return, right? We're nothing. We're not much above any other animals. On the other hand, it also teaches that we are little less than angels, right? And it's our choice based on the decisions we make where we end up. Will we be our most base animal selves, or will we be our higher angelic selves? The sin of the generation of the flood was not only their behavior. Let's face it, they didn't have laws like we had laws. They didn't have the Torah to give them ethics in the way that we do today, or even that comes later as God starts interacting with the people more. They were on their own. And so maybe they were violent, maybe they lived ugly, vicious lives. But that in and of itself is not sinful, because who told them not to? No, the sin of the generation of the flood is that human beings failed to live up to their potential. That instead of being a little less than angels, instead of finding our way to be our best selves and have our best impact on each other and the world, we had sunk to low points, to be our most animalistic of selves, to rule ourselves by violence and by war. And that is what God is punishing for. God is punishing that with the dual nature of people, we were not able to rise to be our best that humanity has to offer. And so God punishes us with an element of duality. So why is that so important? Because right after Noah gets off of the ark, God tries to correct the problem. Right? People didn't have guidance. People didn't have Torah. So God immediately gives Noah laws to follow. We call them the 7 Noachide laws, 7 principles that are not really explicit in the text, but that are drawn out from the text that we consider to be the most basic laws to keep humanity rising higher towards being little less than angels and away from our basest animalistic selves. Included in those laws are things we would expect, like thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not steal, but also things we might not, like you must set up a system of courts to make sure that justice is done, and you shall not eat a limb of an animal that's still living, right? That's cruel. So all these things to try and raise ourselves up to our better selves. And that idea that the law, that mitzvot, that guidelines that are given by God to human beings can keep us on our higher plane and to be our better selves, both as individuals and as communities and as an entire human race. That idea is fundamental to allow Judaism to come into being. Because Judaism takes those 7 Noachide laws and expands it into 613 mitzvot and literally thousands of different practices and rituals and guidelines that are built on top of that to infuse values into our lives and to keep us on that side of little less than angels. When you think about the mitzvot of Judaism, so many of them are really just trying to take our most base fundamental aspects of living and raise them up. Whether that's the kashrut laws and saying blessings before we eat, or the marital laws that govern our sexual relations, or even laws that govern fighting and war, and how we run nations and have courts. And all those things are ways to manage our humanity and keep us away from that which made the generation of the flood so bad, and to keep us, keep our whole human race, and especially the Jewish people, on a higher ethical plane so that we could live better lives, more ethical lives, more moral lives. That is the gift of Torah, right? And that's how the gift of Torah is, the groundwork for it is laid in this Parshat of Noach, right? Without Noach, without the recognition that human beings need parameters and guidelines in order to be our best selves, there would be no Torah. That is the fundamental idea of mitzvah, right? And now we have this great gift of the Torah full of mitzvot, full of those values, full of those moral guidelines that allow us to not only live better for ourselves, but also create a better world all around us. These are difficult times that we are living in. Not the worst times. Sometimes we think it's the worst times. It's not the worst times, but there's stressful and a lot of questions and clearly difficult times. It is times like that when we can embrace the Torah, embrace the mitzvot, embrace this idea that through these values and practices, we can not only make ourselves better, but make the world better, that we can truly have an impact on the individual lives of others and on our communities at large. Now that the holidays have passed, we're starting the Torah again, and here we are, Parshat Noach, and this week we'll meet Abraham and Sarah in Parshat Lech Lecha. It's a good time to think, you know what, let's embrace these values. Let's embrace these laws. We are able to have an impact. That is the fundamental lesson of Parshat Noach. It is the fundamental idea of Judaism, that by bringing these values, by bringing this holiness into our lives, we can make a difference. Now it's time for us to embrace those values and to go ahead and do so. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom in the coming Shabbat, and looking forward to hearing from you soon.